Okay, welcome everyone to the UKCDR virtual dialogue on research enablers for impact, accelerating the impact of the UK's investment in international development research. My name is Marta Tufet, and I'm the Executive Director at the UK Collaborative on Development Research. For those of you who are not familiar with us, UKCDR is a collaborative of major UK research funders working in international development. And for over a decade, we have brought UK research funders together to discuss priorities and coordinate efforts to achieve maximum impact. Our mission is to amplify the value and impact of research for global development by promoting coherence, collaboration, and joint action among UK funders. Today's dialogue aims to showcase the critical role that research is playing in addressing the complex global challenges, and specifically the UK's contribution to achieving that impact, and why, now more than ever, it's important to continue investing in research. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists today, but before I hand over to our keynote speaker, I'm going to take a few minutes to run through a few housekeeping points. As this is a Blue Jeans live event, you will only be able to ask questions through the Q&A function, which is located at the top right of your screen. Once questions are asked, you can upvote the questions by pressing the like button on the questions that you like most from other people, and we will pick the questions which are most upvoted at the end for the panelists to address. May I remind you that when you do ask a question, please include your name and organization so that we know who it's coming from. And if you'd like it to be addressed to someone, please do highlight that also. You will only be able to see presenters on your screen and not the other participants, but you can join the dialogue online via social media using the hashtag #research4impact. That's research, the number 4, and then impact, hashtag #research4impact. And finally, this meeting will be recorded, so you will have access to this after the meeting through the UKCDR website, and we will send you the link after. Right, so it's now my pleasure to open this event to invite Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Officer to the UK government. Patrick is a strong advocate for the importance of research and evidence-based decision-making to address both national and global interest, and we're really, truly thrilled to have him opening this dialogue. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here opening this meeting. And the UK Collaborative on Development Research is, as Marta said, an incredibly important organisation with a great mission. And it's an area that the UK has been really good at. I mean, we're good at science, we're good at research. And this has been an example of how, when we collaborate and we can be more coherent, we can really make a difference. This has been cross-government, it's been cross-government and outside government, including, of course, with the Wellcome Trust. And what I really like about what's happening today is this is about impact. And when R&D is undertaken and we can really understand the impact, that's when we can see the difference. And what are the sorts of things that one looks for? Well, R&D should enable you to do things you otherwise can't do. It should enable you to accelerate things you wish to do. And of course, it's important that as we do that, we evaluate as we go along and understand the impact that we're making. And the importance of R&D really couldn't be more obvious than it is now with the global pandemic that we are all living with. And I think looking back at the last 6 months and thinking about something that, we sort of knew a pandemic was going to come at some point. We didn't know when and we didn't know what. But what have we learned as we look at this? I think the pandemic has absolutely shown the criticality of research. And that's true in everything from research into medicines and vaccines through to understanding the spread of virus, the way in which it propagates, the way in which people become vulnerable, the way in which environments are vulnerable. And that's been truly interdisciplinary. It's not just been biological science, it's been the need to bring in many, many different types of sciences, from anthropology through to crystallography and physical sciences. It's been a broad need for research to come together. The second thing is it's shown the importance of sharing. And one of the things that happened very early on that I was pleased to be involved with was a letter that came from chief scientific advisors from different countries to the journals saying, make everything on COVID open access. Make sure that everybody can get hold of the information. And that notion of being able to open up and share what we're doing, I think, is important for research in general, and it's been exemplified during this pandemic. The third thing is the pandemic showing the importance of learning from each other, and that continues to be the case. Nobody has the answers, and that's often the case, as you all know, in many areas of research. Of course you don't have the answers. That's why you're doing research. And in order to understand how best to respond, we need to make sure that we listen to each other carefully, we learn from each other, and we learn from things that have gone well, things that have not gone well, and where others can teach us lessons. And I think one of the obvious examples at the moment that we're all learning from is as the virus spreads through the world and we have winter and summer in different hemispheres, you can begin to see the effects of that in terms of how the virus behaves and how it spreads. We learn from different interventions that different countries have made. And we look at things and we puzzle, and in many cases we don't understand yet what it is that we're seeing, but the very fact that we're seeing it and sharing it and speaking to each other is incredibly important. The fourth thing is it shows the importance of cross-government join-up, and I don't think it can have been clearer than in this pandemic, the importance of different parts of government talking to each other and government talking to the outside world. And again, it's very obvious that if you're going to try and control something like this, you can't have a policy in health that isn't linked up to a policy in Department for Transport, that isn't linked up to a policy in the Department for Communities and Local Government. So you begin to see that those things are intrinsically interlinked, and the research base of that cannot be differentiated. It needs to come together. And that, of course, is equally true in terms of what happens across the world. And although it's tempting, and you can see this in many places for the press and for people to think of this as a local or a national problem, it's very clear that when we're dealing with something like this, if we don't think of it as a global problem, we will never, ever get to the solution. It's not good enough to look after your own country and nothing else. You have to think about what the opportunities are to make an impact across the world. And that impact is something that now is becoming evident. So I think as we look at the emergence of treatments, and I think in the UK, the recovery study, which showed that dexamethasone reduces mortality and morbidity in patients who require oxygenation in hospital with COVID, that was a remarkable finding because of research done well, not just rushing in and trying things out, but doing them in the context of a trial. And it came up with a medicine which is widely available right the way across the world, inexpensive, and can be used everywhere. And that, I think, is exactly the sort of thing that's important as we think about ways to tackle this disease. And for vaccines, it's going to be even more important that we think of this as a global issue. There's no point vaccinating a population in a single country if you're not thinking about how to vaccinate the world and think about what needs to happen to protect us all against this, which is global and therefore requires a global response. So impact is important. Impact is what this is all about, and thinking globally. And I think last week the Prime Minister gave a talk at the United Nations General Assembly, and I think made several of these points and laid out a 5-point plan for some of the things that he wants to see happen in terms of the pandemic, and they were global and they require research for sure. And therefore, this isn't going to go away as an issue. It's going to be something that we're going to need to work together on ever more closely. But the work of the UKCDR, of course, goes beyond a single event, however important and life-changing the pandemic has been. And we know that this has been a successful organisation. If one looks at things like the Global Challenges Research Fund, the Newton Fund, the fact that the NIHR Global Health Research Programme, the impact the Wellcome Trust is having, this is something that's making a difference across the world. And I'm particularly pleased that from 2015 to 2020, the amount the UK government was spending in this area of global research actually tripled during that time. So this is something the UK takes seriously, it's something that it should take seriously, and it's something that requires thinking about across the world, not in a parochial way. There's definitely opportunity to do more, and I would hope that as there's changes in DFID and the FCDO to become the new FCDO, that this is given a very high priority as something that needs to be looked after and needs to be thought about. And as we move into a period of the integrated review, where the country is looking at its overall outward-facing policies, it's very obvious that research and development needs to be a key part of that and needs to be something that is central to how we think about the future. And I was looking at the impact stories that you're going to be talking about in part today, and it's very clear that there are big global areas that we are going to have to work on in a coherent, joined up way. Across the 11 impact stories, climate, of course, features heavily, both in terms of climate itself and in terms of the impact on things like crops and food security. Infection, of course, features heavily, not just the coronavirus pandemic that we're living with now, but of course Ebola, where there is already another outbreak going on that we need to be very careful about. HIV, of course, which we still live with and is still a devastating problem across the world, and malaria. And as we think about vaccines, it's not just vaccines for humans, but vaccines for livestock that becomes important. And all of this, to come back to the point about interdisciplinary research, is not just a biological problem. It's clearly a problem of society and how we work. Everything from how we make sure that people are financially and socially included in what happens, how we think about the multidimensional aspects of every problem we try to tackle, how we think about issues such as tax sustainability as part of the problem that we need to get right in order to make things acceptable and livable for people, and of course problems that aren't going away but must be tackled if we're going to end up with a fairer society. And in the impacts, of course, there's a very big one that's pulled out, which is violence against women. So the research underlying all of these things is going to be of crucial importance as we go forward. We need to do more. We absolutely need to be coherent. And I think one of the opportunities that we have with the formation of FCDO and with the integrated review is to think about how we get our ODA spend in a more coherent place even than we have it now. We could do more if we get that right. And how we make sure that we focus on the big things that come down. We can't predict them, but there are some that we can. And a quote from what the Prime Minister said last week was, humanity was caught napping by COVID. I think we weren't entirely napping, but I mean, we certainly knew that the pandemic could come, but we didn't know what. But as he said, nobody can say we've not been warned about climate. And that is a big area that we must now focus on amongst the others. So I warmly welcome this meeting and the interesting agenda that you have ahead of you, and really congratulate UKCDR on what's happened so far. And in order not to leave them just with a glow of pride, to say there's an awful lot more that we've got to do, and that's why this is so important today. So thank you, Marta, for the invitation to speak at this meeting.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your very useful insight. Right, so now that we've heard from Patrick, I'd like to set the tone for our panel discussion today. Could we please share my slides? Thank you. So I hope everyone can see this now. Right, so I want to highlight how the UK has managed to make a significant contribution to the global challenges by investing in research. And I will do this by sharing with you our recently published series of impact success stories that Patrick has briefly mentioned, which are freely available and you can download from our website. This is a collection of 11 stories that we have compiled through a unique collaborative effort by UK research funders, including FCDO, formerly DFID, BEIS, DHSC, UKRI, and Wellcome. Next slide, please. So the world has seen huge development progress in the past few decades alone. For example, since the 1990s, we have more than half the number of child deaths and of people living in extreme poverty. And this is really, truly remarkable in such a short period of time. And it's true that economic growth has been a major driver, But this progress is also in large part due to scientific and technological advances and the new knowledge that we have generated through research. And the UK has and is continuing to play a major role in this. The UK was the first G7 nation to meet the UN target of providing 0.7% of GNI as official development assistance. And since 2015, this target has been enshrined in law. The UK also leads the way among donors in spending on research. So about 10% of UK ODA is dedicated to R&D now. And because of this, the UK is seen as a world leader in shaping the global development agenda through research, and it has very high standards. ODA spending is among the most scrutinized parts of UK government spending. So with these 11 cross-funder success stories, which you can see here on the slide, we aim to present a representative, although we recognize it's not an exhaustive, showcase of the UK's long-term and large-scale investments in impact research. And as you can see, they range from a wide range of disciplines, from building the case for climate action and understanding the multidimensional nature of poverty, to reducing the threat of malaria and tackling HIV/AIDS. Next slide, please. So what we have seen across the stories is a number of common themes, which have been crucial to their success. They have combined the natural and social sciences to reach those in need. They have been relying on partnerships for funds, research, and implementation. They have truly shifted the discourse to influence policy, and they have reached out across disciplines for new solutions. So let's take a look at each of these in turn. Next slide, please. So UK research has played a key role in the global response to malaria, to HIV/AIDS, and Ebola through the provision of treatments, vaccines. But the greatest impact has really been reached whenever we have incorporated anthropological insight into the development of solutions. For example, let's take a look at Ebola. Next slide, please. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this case study because the lessons learned and legacy which have been derived from this are of great relevance to the COVID-19 pandemic today, as Patrick has eloquently explained. So the Ebola outbreak, as many will recall, devastated countries across West Africa from 2014 to about 2016. And at the time, it was the largest in history. And with no vaccine to curb its spread, the disease tragically claimed more than 11,000 lives. And there was concern at the time that Ebola would spread globally, much like COVID-19 has done. But by March 2016, the crisis was declared over, and research played an important role. So unlike COVID-19, Ebola was not new. We had known about its existence since the 1970s, but the lack of a commercial market removed the imperative to create a safe, licensed Ebola vaccine that could be stockpiled and deployed to prevent a large outbreak. So unfortunately, Ebola spread far and quickly, and not only because of its contagiousness, but also because of the social conditions. Conflict, poverty, weak health systems really undermined the trust between communities and government. So international cooperation was crucial, and the UK took a leading role in this, using its long history of outbreak response. It rapidly mobilized researchers and funds to understand the virus and the disease, much like it's doing now for COVID-19. It established lab protocols for diagnosing and treating victims. It accelerated efforts to develop test vaccines. But importantly, it set up an innovative anthropology platform which deployed social science intelligence to compromise between traditional practices for patient care and management of the dead, as well as biomedical focus on reducing new cases. And as a result of these investments, the international community was better prepared when a new Ebola outbreak struck in DRC a few years later. And with the current outbreaks, we now have 6 diagnostic tools, a global network of medical professionals, and a safe and effective vaccine. So in this respect, the West Africa Ebola outbreak was a game changer. And it reminded people that this obscure virus could become a real global threat and exposed the world's interconnectedness, its interdependence, and on the need to embed social sciences in the research response. And it's led to a number of legacies that have been essential and continue to be essential now in combating COVID-19 today, namely the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, CEPI, which was established in 2017 as a result of a consensus that a coordinated international and intergovernmental plan was needed to develop and deploy new vaccines to prevent future epidemics. And as I'm sure many have seen in the news, CEPI today is leading a huge role in the race to find a safe and effective vaccine against COVID-19. The UK Public Health Rapid Support Team was established to deploy research response alongside the humanitarian response, and has since been deployed to combat numerous outbreaks across the world. And then finally, the WHO R&D Blueprint Team, which was established in 2016 to form a global strategy and preparedness plan that allows the rapid activation of research and developing activities during epidemics. And this group, in the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, rapidly convened experts across the world to develop the COVID-19 R&D roadmap, which is guiding global research efforts today. Next slide, please. So a second cross-cutting theme that we have seen across the stories is partnerships. As the SDGs make clear, explicitly in Goal 17, governments must work together to provide support for agreed-on goals. The research landscape, too, is now characterized by international consortia of funders, institutions, and individual researchers that are capable of responding in a dynamic fashion to events on the ground. As I've explained in response to Ebola, the simultaneous development of trials and vaccines in multiple countries is really emblematic of this collaborative approach. UK government has played a leading role in advocating for action on individual SDGs, and providing significant support for research, from core funding to multilateral organizations or focus funding to institutions and programs. This can be seen, for example, in the support for the many research initiatives that underpin the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And UK's contribution is also demonstrated by its willingness to support the private sector to deliver agile, customer-oriented interventions to boost economic growth, such as seed funding for the highly successful mobile banking application M-Pesa. Next slide, please. So the studies have also shifted the discourse to influence policy, really transforming global approaches to addressing problems such as climate change and chronic poverty. So how we understand and measure poverty determines our response to it. And UK-based research has been key in shifting the paradigm from framing poverty in terms of income to one that recognizes the multidimensional experience of being poor. And UK research has also led the way in identifying gender as a cross-cutting issue. And this work on measuring and preventing gender-based violence has been really taken up internationally. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's take a quick look at one of the other case studies, building the case for climate change action, which, as Patrick has explained, is a key challenge that we're facing today. So the climate science behind the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report, has shaped the global discourse on climate and provided the basis for international action. The IPCC's assessment reports are the most credible source of information on climate change and the baseline for making evidence-based decisions in international negotiations. And UK-driven research on climate modelling, on sea level projects, on extreme weather forecasts, and green gas emission estimates has formed the bedrock of these IPCC reports, as well as provided scientific consensus needed to convince governments to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, the Marrakesh Accords, and the Paris Agreement. The UK has also supported national adaptation plans through international climate finance programs. The UK has supported more than 57 million people in low and middle income countries to cope with the impacts of climate change and help reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions by 16 million tons. And finally, the UK has also influenced global discourse towards a zero emissions future. So last year, the UK became the first G7 nation to legislate reducing greenhouse emissions to net zero by 2050. Next slide, please. So overall, the impact case studies really underscore the value of a multidisciplinary approach aligned with the holistic ethos of the SDGs, the acceptance of which is evident in the launch of several major multidisciplinary research funds in the UK in recent years, notably the 5-year 1.5 billion Global Challenges Research Fund, or GCREF. An example of the value of a multidisciplinary approach is exemplified in the impact study in urban futures. Next slide, please. So by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in urban centers. And there has been a real shift in dialogue towards sustainable urbanism, with a focus on livelihoods, quality of life, and the rights of people who live in cities. And this shift owes much to collaborative research across the world, but especially in the UK. The UK's support for practical and policy-oriented research on urban governance has pushed a sustainability agenda in urban governments. It has allowed space for more participatory urban practice, and it has taken an interdisciplinary approach that really mirrors the complexity of urban life. Next and final slide, please. So the 11 success stories provide an overview of UK research contribution to improving the lives of people globally. However, there are many emerging global challenges that threaten the progress we have made so far, as we're experiencing now the threat of emerging diseases, but also climate change, conflict, migration, increasing population density. So now more than ever, we must continue to invest in research in a collaborative way, through partnerships and through multidisciplinary approaches to address these interlinked challenges. We hope that the case studies, which you can download from our website at UKCDR, will help stakeholders assess the value of research funding and provide guidance for future research investment. Right, and with that, I would now like to introduce Melissa Leach, who is the director of the Institute of Development Studies at IDS, and she is also an independent member of the Strategic Coherence for ODA Research Board, which governs UKCDR. She's going to be leading our dialogue today on how to enable, accelerate, and evaluate impact of the UK's investment in international development research. Over to you, Melissa.
Lovely. So, hello everybody. Many thanks to Marta and to UKCDR for organising this incredibly important event. And also thank you to Patrick for some really inspiring opening remarks. So why is this so important right now? Well, as we've seen, the UK has a long and important track record of success in ODA-supported work that has had big impacts on some of the challenges of our day over the last decade. But this is now more important than ever, whether we're talking about meeting global threats, current ones, COVID-19 on everybody's minds and its major economic and social outfalls, or whether we're thinking about the 10 years to go in delivering on the Sustainable Development Goal commitments, or indeed climate change, which is in the news this week, quite rightly. I think what we're realizing is that making the changes to meet these threats require transformations. It's often not business as usual in societies and economies, towards greater sustainability, greater social justice and equity, and connecting those things up. And to do that requires research which is also not just business as usual, but is actually transformative in the kind of knowledge it generates and the way that knowledge is generated and shared. And this, I think, is the challenge and the moment that we're in. We've heard a bit about the current ODA research budget for the UK, currently about 10%. We're at a moment of a UK government spending review and also the integrated review, which will have important implications for the level of that budget and the way it's divided and used across government. But I think we're also learning things about what it takes to make research transformative in the way it needs to be. So interdisciplinarity, but actually not just that, what is sometimes called transdisciplinarity, co-constructing knowledge between scholars and academics and those in society, civil society, people in governments, which we know is vital to make that research make a difference. We also have learned a lot over the last decade about mobilizing for impact over a long period, some of those conceptual impacts which take a long time to come through, to shift the paradigm, as it were, but also impacts in real time, as we saw in the Ebola response anthropology case, and indeed as the follow-on initiative, the Social Science and Humanitarian Action Platform, which I have the privilege to be leading, is doing, bringing advice in real time into responses. And I think we're also learning a great deal about equitable partnerships, partnerships across people, across places, and partnerships which are based on what I sometimes call mutual co-learning. So our agenda today may be about the UK's research funding, but actually the UK has an enormous amount to learn about addressing these issues in our own backyard from what we learn from others, as well as contributing together to global challenges. So it's all very well to say all of this, but I think we also know that it's really hard to do. And the last decade has taught us some things about the difficulties of delivering on enabling research for impact, as well as some of the successes. And what we want to do over the next hour or so is actually to explore those challenges in greater depth and to hear from a really fantastic panel about what it takes, not just to understand these various aspects of research enabling for impact, but actually to deliver on them. So I'm going to introduce the panel in just a second, but in the meantime, I'd just like to remind our audience that as you're listening to the dialogue, please enter and upvote your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be coming to those questions after the panel discussion. So who's our panel? Well, we couldn't be luckier, actually. We have 4 incredibly dynamic and international panelists, and they happen to be an all-female lineup, which is kind of nice as well. So they are, in no particular order, Nupur Barua, who is head of the South Asia Research Hub in the new FCDO. We have Eunice Muthengi, who's the acting head of the East Africa Research Hub in the Research and Evidence Division, again, of FCDO. So 2 rather different regional perspectives. We have Helen Fletcher, who's the Director of International Development for the Newton and Global Challenges Research Fund at UKRI, and is also a Professor of Immunology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And we have Nyuvani Madise, who is Director of Research and Development Policy and Head of the Malawi Office for the African Institute for Development Policy. So a really fantastic lineup. And if I could first ask now the panelists to come live. I hope you'll all be able to see them on the screen. Excellent. So welcome again to all of you. So here's our panel. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, ask the panelists to give a very, very quick round, first of all, to say what their perspective is on the big issue that we're tackling today, from the perspective they're coming from. So the question at this point is, why does greater investment in research matter? And why does it matter now from your perspective? So perhaps, Nyuvani, we might start with you.
Who is attending and listening to the presentation. When asked this question, I'm always reminded of a situation I was at a panel in Sweden. It was about HIV research, and there was a minister for the equivalent of international development there, and he was just explaining why they fund research in low-income countries. And the issue with them was that every country needs to have at least one strong research institution. Research is not sort of like a luxury good. Research is a necessity. And that has actually helped me think through in terms of why we need research. Every nation needs research capacity to identify unique problems and to actually know how to solve them. So we've seen the impact on climate change, the COVID case study that actually truly emphasizes the fact that we do need to have a local research capacity to be able to address the issues that beset both individual countries as well as a globe. So yeah, that's my take on research.
Great, thank you, Nyuvani, and we'll come back to you on some of those points. But I'll turn now to Eunice. So to you, why does greater investment in research for development matter at this point?
Thank you. Melissa, before I joined DFID, which is now FCDO, I was a researcher. The reason I joined is because of the emphasis that the organization places on research and evidence. where I work in the East Africa Research and Innovation Hub, we're really focused on generating and promoting the use of evidence and ensuring that evidence is used to guide decision-making, program planning, and policy. So for me, I really feel like it's important for us, first of all, to invest in more research, because otherwise we're not able to understand what works, we're not able to understand what doesn't work, we're not able to ensure that our programs are actually, we know who they're reaching. And in order to address many of the inequalities, we actually need to understand this. We need to understand why certain populations are not benefiting from programs, why they're excluded, and research can help us to understand this. So for me, from that equity perspective, it's really important. I was also a few months ago to be able to visit the Can We Wellcome Trust research program in Kilifi in Kenya as part of a Secretary of State visit. And there, just being able to see how they're able to leverage their internationally accredited labs and facilities and platforms to tackle COVID-19. To really be at the forefront of testing, serosurveillance, modeling of transmission, and even vaccine testing. It's just a demonstration of why it's important, so that we're equipped, and so that scientists within the region are able to really be at the forefront of making a difference and of trying to address these global challenges. Thanks.
Okay. Brilliant. So Helen, perhaps I'll come to you next. So to you, why does greater investment in research matter to development now?
Well, there's the direct impacts to development itself, and I think we've heard really compelling stories from both Sir Patrick Vallance and from Marta on how research can directly contribute towards development. But the reason that we can do that is because we have trust. And so we have trust between the people who are generating research. We have trust between researchers and policymakers, between policymakers and communities. And research and innovation can actually act as a tool to bring all those people together and to represent their voices. And in fact, the great thing is that if you include policymakers, communities, different researchers, different groups, the more inclusive you are, the more impactful that your research actually becomes. And we need quite often to be able to respond very rapidly. So if you look at COVID-19, we needed to generate that knowledge and share that knowledge and implement that policy. And to do that, again, you need trust. And so through research and innovation, through many years of careful partnership building and listening to each other and understanding each other's needs, we can actually move very rapidly when you are in a crisis response.
Excellent. I think that trust point is one we may well come back to, so I'm really glad you've picked that one up. So now turning to Nupur, why does greater investment in research matter from your perspective?
Thank you, Melissa. So the challenges we face in tackling development are very large, very complex and changing. And despite sort of good progress, the burden of disease in developing countries remains unacceptably high, while access to good jobs, education, and essential public services remains too low. Achievement of the SDGs, or the global goals as we now call them, is threatened by high food and energy prices, weak governance, conflict, social exclusion, and we are all experiencing the effects of climate change, seeing huge population movements. And of course, we are now in the middle of a global pandemic. All of these challenges actually really come in the way of not just achieving the SDGs, but they challenge the livelihoods and resilience of millions of people in developing countries and across the globe. So research is absolutely essential, not just for understanding, but also tackling challenges like these. We want to use research not just to improve our knowledge and choices available to our partners across the world, but also to strengthen our own decisions and to make sure that they're based on sound evidence. And without new knowledge, scientific innovation, rigorous evidence, and new ideas, I'm afraid we have no chance of success in tackling global challenges. So I think this discussion is really exciting and very timely, given that we are in the midst of one of the biggest global challenges of the century. And as Sir Patrick Vallance mentioned, the criticality of research in informing our response to the pandemic. Thanks, Melissa. Back to you.
Great, and I think what you've also highlighted very much there is that we're in the midst of multiple global challenges, and that actually to meet the global goals and to address these threats requires that we actually integrate across sectors. It's no good addressing health and urban and climate change in silos, as we're seeing with COVID-19. What started as a health challenge is now sort of spiraling into economic and social crises. And likewise, I think we've learned a great deal about the global goals being needing to be addressed as a package. So there's a big agenda there, I think, around integration. But there's also, I mean, all of you have spoken beautifully already about the value of research in supporting people in multiple parts of the world, including low and middle income countries, to weather these crises better, to be resilient, to address questions of poverty and so on, and perhaps to address global challenges. And yet, of course, in the UK, and we're talking about UK agendas partly today, we're often confronted by the argument that actually we should be putting the national interest first. And at times of constrained budget, should it actually be the UK's national interests that are prioritised? I'd like to throw this one back to you. How and in what ways can investment in research help us balance perhaps national and global interests, and what kinds of arguments might we make there? I'm going to ask Helen for her views on this first, because I know it's an issue that you've contributed to a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And I would very strongly argue that if research is of a global interest, it's also of a national interest, because nations do not live in isolation. Infectious diseases and climate change do not respect borders. And actually, our world is so connected today that it's becoming increasingly difficult to find a problem or a challenge that affects one country without having an impact or a shockwave within the region or even globally. And I would say, you know, if we're considering national and global interests, it's not really it's not a dichotomy. They are, what is a global interest is also a national interest. But within that, the challenge is understanding the priorities, because, you know, sat in the UK, we may have a different view of a priority than if you're sat in a different country. But even within a country, if you're sat within one community, you may have a different view of a priority of another community. And so the challenge, I would say, is around the prioritization rather than, you know, because all of these things are in our interest globally. And we have been trying to address this by shifting the way that we do development research over the last 5 or 10 years. I think we've got a much better understanding now that the people who are contributing to the conversation and influencing the direction of the research are also likely to be those who benefit from the research. And so if you want to have widely distributed impact of your development research, you need to be very inclusive in the voices that you're including within your priority setting for that.
Yeah.
You know, and how, you know, the challenge, I guess, is, you know, how we do that. And so within our research proposals within UKRI, we very much encourage people and, you know, and often make it an explicit requirement that people seek the view of communities, of policymakers, that the voices in country are represented, but then within country that different voices within that country are also heard as well, again, so that we can distribute the benefits of that research. And broadening of inclusion has actually had a positive impact on our research. So it's driven innovation. It's not limited what we've done. We've actually seen direct benefits to the quality of research that's generated as a consequence. So I suppose just to finish your challenging question, I'd say that the national interest and the global interests, those lines are actually blurred. And we need to be innovative and impactful solutions, and they need to have very broad partnerships as a base, and we need to have those different voices very much built into that priority setting.
Yeah, excellent. I think those are really key points, and I'm going to throw one more back to you. Do you think there's also an argument that by being good and facilitatory at the kinds of things that you've been talking about, the UK also benefits from becoming known and appreciated as a thought leader, perhaps, or as a good partner and as a good enabler? And is that also actually ultimately in the UK's national interest? I'd be interested in your comments on that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have very clear evidence that the UK is a thought leader in this space. We were one of the countries who originally developed the concept of equitable partnership and the need to be involved and to be inclusive among research funders in Europe. People look to the UK for examples of how we can actually implement these kind of research approaches. So yeah, I mean, I would say that we do have the evidence that the UK is leading there. And of course, we've had the advantage of sort of decades and decades of research through DFID, now FCDO, that we've been able to learn from. And so it's just been building over many years of experience in these the best sort of approach for pulling this out. Okay,
great. But clearly no grounds for complacency, because we're in a challenging world. So I'd like now to turn to look in a little bit more detail at what some of these enablers are and how we really deliver on them. So let's start with impact. How can we ensure that research really does make a difference and make a difference to the people whose lives whoever the we is, would like to see transformed? What are the enablers of research impact of different kinds? So Nupur, you mentioned sort of this in your sort of opening statement. Can you tell us a bit more about what you see as the enablers of research impact?
Thanks, Melissa. I think this is a really important question. If we're interested in research impact, I think we need to go beyond just investing the money. So I want to flag 4 key points. Firstly, I think it's really important to ensure that the research is set up in a way that it is outcome driven from the outset. Secondly, ensure that the relevance of the research is defined according to what is genuinely needed, and in consultation with international partners with contextual knowledge. So partnerships, as we know, are absolutely crucial. Thirdly, set up mechanisms to measure impact. I think Sir Patrick mentioned that, but measuring impact not just in the longer term, but also looking at intermediate outcomes using relevant metrics of measurement. And for longer term research, sort of really build in mechanisms to test for ongoing relevance, as the research context can sometimes change quite rapidly during the life cycle of a project. And finally, what is absolutely crucial is uptake, or getting research into use. Now, we all know how challenging that is, but this is really about striking a balance between creating new knowledge and getting knowledge, both new and existing, into use. Thus the importance of research synthesis to influence policymakers. And this is really about the art of getting all the evidence that exists on a particular topic into a coherent package, and then communicating it to policymakers, but in a way that the synthesized evidence is usable. Now, we know that some academics use a language that is often not comprehensible, to the average policymaker. So what is really important is to try and simplify it as much as we can to make it usable for programmatic and policy action. Thanks. Back to you, Melissa.
Okay, excellent. I might just, those are, I think, really key points. I might just push you a little bit more on this question of measurement, because some would argue that the impacts that matter don't always lend themselves to easy sort of numbers, the kinds of measures that maybe donors sometimes want to hear about and that are easy to track. What in your experience should we do about this, actually? I mean, if we're interested in multiple kinds of impact, some of them are not going to be as measurable as others. Have you found ways around this? Should we be looking at other kinds of sometimes non-measurable indicators?
So this is one of my favorite topics, Melissa, and I think the criticality of mixed method research, using really high quality qualitative research alongside quantitative metrics of measurement, and Marta mentioned how the role of anthropologists really changed the response to Ebola in Sierra Leone. I think that's a really good example of using a multidisciplinary sort of approach to respond to a crisis, but really finding ways to use a methodological toolkit that really answers the questions being asked and to do it rigorously, and using one to triangulate the other. But what is absolutely cardinal is about using really good quality qualitative research rather than just using voices of the poor in boxes, if you like.
No, I very much agree, and I guess those points also apply to how we measure impact, how we know we're making a difference, and the kinds of research, if you like, that are done on impact. You heard earlier there are sometimes some quantitative indicators of lives saved, vaccines delivered, but there are also some more qualitative impact stories, narratives that are going to be important to tell us whether we're making a difference. But I really appreciate actually your response there, because it's opened up where I wanted to move next in this discussion, which was actually about interdisciplinarity, which might be mixed methods, because methods employ different disciplines. Disciplines employ different methods, but is also about perhaps bringing together the perspectives, the sensibilities that different disciplines might have. And I'd like to turn now, perhaps to start with Nuvani, to ask you a little bit more about why you think interdisciplinarity matters and how we can best deliver it, because it's not easy to do, again. Nuvani, can you unmute your microphone?
I have unmuted. You can't hear me?
No, we can hear you very well now. Yep.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay. I was just saying that my discipline is social statistics, which by design is interdisciplinary. But still, for a long time, I was working within that bubble of social statisticians, where you have people doing transport statistics, education statistics, health statistics, etc. But it wasn't until I started working with engineers that I truly appreciated interdisciplinarity type of research. One of the projects that we worked on was on food security, and it was fascinating to see the different approaches that people were bringing to the table. It was a large consortium, many countries, different disciplines. What I thought was new, the engineers already knew about that, and vice versa. They were coming up with, oh, we need to do qualitative research. I'm like, yes, we know how to do that. So it's when you actually begin to work with others, you realize that actually, what I need, the solutions that I think I need, have already been discovered, and vice versa. But equally also, it challenges you in a new way, because now you're looking at things in a different light. Opportunities have opened up. You're not limited to just your own discipline. So to me, that has been fascinating. And there are issues like the intractable challenges that, some of them we've talked about. I think of things like gender equality, and how you can do gender equality with just one discipline is a puzzle. But also equally, things like addressing poverty, you can't really do it just by looking at one discipline. And then in terms of how we might do interdisciplinary research, I always think that you need to do a problem-solving approach. And to be able to do that, first and foremost, we really need to understand what the problems are. And that means, that working and talking with the communities that are most affected by the issues we're trying to address. And then once we've done that, we need to bring the right combination of disciplines and to truly work in a either interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way to be able to address these issues. We also do need to incentivize interdisciplinarity. Melissa, you've said it's not easy to do interdisciplinary research, and I agree 100%. And unless we incentivize it, especially in universities, this is not going to happen. But we need to incentivize, we need to make sure that people are doing interdisciplinary research and knowing that the rewards usually are much, much greater than just, doing solo individual disciplinary research, or even just giving up because the challenge is too high.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's wonderful, and I think you've made some really key points about actually how one can move forward, and this idea of, in a way, getting people together around a problem is often key. So, Helen, I mean, you've been in the thick of these discussions about interdisciplinarity and your leadership role for the Global Challenges Research Fund in particular. And I wonder if you could reflect for us on both why interdisciplinarity matters, but also on some of the things that you've learned, perhaps from experience of working with others, about what it takes to deliver it well. How can we actually make sure that this sort of holy grail of interdisciplinary combinations actually happen in practice? Unmute. Microphone. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So first of all, why does interdisciplinary research matter? And I think if you are interested in contributing towards the Sustainable Development Goals, to the greatest challenges facing our globe today, then you actually have no choice but to do interdisciplinary research, because the Sustainable Development Goals, our global challenges, are interconnected. And so the example given by Sir Patrick Vallance of a biomedical decision taken in the UK, which has a huge impact on our economy, on our mental health, on our society. And, that's just one small example. And I think of all of the SDGs and all of the global challenges facing us today have that need for an interdisciplinary and a connected perspective. So if you are interested in doing development research, you have to do interdisciplinary research. And certainly we have, as Niavani said, we've tried to encourage that. We've tried to incentivize that through research funding. So we explicitly ask our applicants to consider the problem, the challenge that they're trying to address from an interdisciplinary perspective, and to think about the different expertise and the sort of cascading and knock-on effects of what they're trying to investigate, so that they can bring those groups together. So from a funder perspective, we're encouraging it that way. And we work our peer review panels extremely hard to really scrutinise those partnerships and make sure that they're meaningful and appropriate, and they're actually going to deliver the research outcomes. But what we can do as funders is probably less than half of what's needed to achieve interdisciplinary research, because academic institutions actually need to move to meet us, and researchers themselves need to move to meet us. So researchers need to be able to understand the dialogue of different research disciplines within their own institutions and across different institutions. And what we've seen over the last 5 years is that those institutions in the UK who have been most successful in accessing funding from the Global Challenges Research Fund or the Newton Fund are those who've deliberately restructured departments and institutes to be able to encourage that dialogue across the disciplines and that joint thinking between different research groups, so that when applications come to us, you've got, experienced researchers who are used to talking each other's language, have got that depth of understanding. And I think, we need to see more of that over the next 5 years if we're going to, achieve the sort of the problems which are facing us today.
Yeah. Wonderful. And I guess part of the challenge, I think, where enormous progress has been made is also overcoming some of the established sort of hierarchies and power relations perhaps between disciplines. I mean, I come at this as a social scientist, as an anthropologist, where for a long time we have often been seen as the kind of afterthought. So it's the biomedical scientists, the biologists who are kind of running the show, the climate scientists, and the social science, behavioural science is almost called in just to explain a few social and cultural factors. I think what's very positive in some of this recent generation of UK supported research is that that's being turned around, and the relations between disciplines are much more equitable, so that kind of everybody's getting together to frame what the problem is as well as how to tackle it in a much more equitable way. So this kind of leads on into some of the questions I think we really need to think about hard around equity, actually. And I'd like us now to turn to quite a challenge that's often thrown out, which people say, well, it's all very well to talk about equity in research and inclusivity and involving institutions in lower middle income countries and so on. But actually, we've also got to have research that is absolutely excellent. And I'd like to ask, well, I'm going to turn perhaps particularly to Eunice and Muthengi in the first instance, you to reflect a little bit on whether there is a tension between inclusive equity in research and, as it were, getting everybody on board, and the excellence, the rigour of that research. And if there is a tension, what do we do about it? How can we balance those things? Or perhaps what are the roles of strengthening research capacities or indeed understandings of excellence in order to get this balance better? So Eunice, first of all, from you, how can we balance equity and excellence, and what are the roles perhaps of strengthening capacities?
So I would say the way that we reach that balance is through equitable partnership. I think that the important thing, first of all, is that we can't assume that sort of trying to promote more equity is a trade-off when it comes to excellence. So we shouldn't assume that we're going to lose excellence by focusing more on equity. In fact, we can have both, and we can have both, I think, by promoting equitable partnership, by ensuring that researchers from low and middle income countries are actually setting the agenda, involved in setting the agenda, not just in the implementation of the research. And that's one of the ways that we balance and ensure that we can have equity and also excellent research. I think another point is that we also need to think about, it's also about how we define research, excellent research and research excellence, and sometimes that's different. Defined differently, let's say within low and middle income countries compared to, developed nations. So we need to think about that and how we balance those definitions of research excellence. And I think there's clear evidence that if we're looking for excellent research by involving, as I mentioned, sort of having the equity and the more involvement in leadership from low and middle income countries, that will actually improve the rigor and the utility of the research itself. So you'll end up with research that's able to to be used to influence policy and culturally relevant, because you're working with people who actually know that environment, and that helps to improve the quality of the research itself. And just to touch on capacity strengthening, I think it's really important, and we need to invest more in strengthening research capacity and strengthening research institutions. But at the same time, we need to also be aware that it's not a one-way street, actually, within these equitable partnerships. It's not just about strengthening the capacity of researchers in developing countries, but it goes both ways. The learning goes both ways, and there's a lot that researchers from developing countries can learn from the researchers in developed countries about the work that they're doing, and that helps to improve that aspect, I think, of shared problem solving, of, as we talked about before, shared sort of priority setting as well within this context. So definitely, I think it's important for us to incorporate that as we think about research capacity strengthening, ensure that even as we're developing these research capacity strengthening programs, that there's within the design phase from very early on that local research leaders are involved in ensuring that these programs are appropriate, that they're framed in the right way, that they're going to be impactful and sustainable. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, no, I mean, brilliant. I think so. Redefining excellence and actually capacity strengthening as a mutual process. And then actually this distinction between equity and excellence begins to break down completely. I think that's a really very powerful and important argument. Nuvani, where do you come in on this as someone who's worked a lot in the area of capacity strengthening and thought a lot about it, I know. Is there a tension between equity and excellence? How do you come at this, and what role does capacity strengthening have?
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to echo what Eunice has said, that there isn't really a tension. We create tensions between equitable partnerships and research excellence. But I think we need to move away from that mindset. As someone who has maybe spent longer of my time in the UK working in a UK institution, I was pleasantly surprised coming back 2.5 years ago to Africa and actually seeing some really, really wonderful research. So, there are, large pockets of research excellence in low and middle income countries. But I think where we sometimes have challenges is maybe we may have different perceptions of research excellence, as Eunice has said, but also some understanding that, what we may perceive as tensions might be to do with the fact that we're not understanding each other very well, maybe cultural differences, or what we consider as important things for research are not necessarily important things for research in an African or an Asian country. So ref and they don't matter in that context. There may be other things that are actually considered very important. But then also we need to stop having unnecessary restrictions on funding utilization. If our goal is, for example, excellence as well as equitable relationships and building capacity, because sometimes we get all these, you can't use this money for this, for that. When you think through, you're thinking, okay, I can't really see the justification for saying this. So we need to move away from restrictions that actually are not really necessary, but to focus on the outcome. Maybe I also need to say that, if we are building the relationships, the capacity both ways, UK researchers learning how to do research in the Global South and vice versa, this process takes time. And usually it's longer than the 3-year life of a grant. So we need to think about that. And just at a time when partnerships are solid formed, maybe that's when the grant comes to an end. So we need to think through those. But finally, my final point is that, especially with the issue of interdisciplinary research, that's where I find perhaps weaknesses in terms of truly interdisciplinary research in the Global South, actually doing excellent research. in part, it's because the disciplines have still got their borders around them, haven't come to actually working. Social scientists, as Melissa have said, bringing in social scientists, engineers together in the same way that the UK has done successfully over the past 10 or so years. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's perhaps, I take from that points about the need for flexibility in research funding for longer term, and actually for breaking down some of these institutional disincentives as well as part of a capacity exercise. Okay, so you've all in different ways been underlying the importance of research partnerships and especially equitable partnerships. So I'm now going to ask each of you to reflect actually a little bit more solidly. What do these equitable partnerships that we talk about actually look like in practice, and how can we move towards them? What are the key ingredients and what do we need to put them in place? And I wonder if you could each give us a quick example of something that you feel is an equitable partnership, has been an equitable partnership, and what's really made it work. So let's just go around and hear from each of you on that. So Nupur, perhaps begin with you this time.
Thank you, Melissa. So a couple of quick points. Firstly, how the partnerships are set up is absolutely crucial. We should build not just North-South collaborations in the plural, but also South-South partnerships where relevant. Secondly, how priorities are shaped or problems are developed is crucial. And ideally for collaborative research, we should aim to co-develop research questions and work up areas of mutual interest instead of sort of pre-deciding themes for international development context based on assumptions of relevance. And finally, how we frame partnerships is absolutely critical. I remember a researcher from Nepal mentioning at a conference that they no longer want to be data Sherpas, quote unquote, responsible for just collecting the data from the ground, whilst academic outputs are produced by northern partners. So the importance of collaborating as equal partners and the co-production element of research within that. A really good example is our Global Research Partnership Program that we have in the South Asia Research Hub that we implement jointly with the Government of India's Department of Biotechnology and partnering with UKRI, actually, leveraging the Newton Fund. Now, this is a really good example of government departments working together, both in the UK and India, on shared priorities, but for the benefit of third countries. What makes it particularly innovative are the trilateral partnerships between UK, Indian, and developing country researchers, but also the way in which the partnerships have actually been set up, with the UK and India sort of jointly identifying the research themes, jointly framing the research goals, but also using joint panels co-chaired by India and the UK for evaluating research proposals. So this really exemplifies an equal partnership for research with a focus on academic excellence, but also addressing global development challenges. Thanks.
I was going to ask each of you to come back with one final remark, but I think we'll now need to do that in conjunction with the questions. So we've got a whole set of questions in the chat here. So what I'm going to do is read out the three questions that have had the most likes, the most upvotes, and then I'll come back to each of you and ask you to respond to probably one question, the question you feel you can really say something to, and also add a final remark that you'd like to kind of leave the audience with. So the first question here, which was from Chris Lee, but it received 12 likes, is: do you see a change in the air with the new FCDO and a focus more on middle and higher income research partnerships versus low and middle income? how to balance these different agendas, low and the middle income. I think that's a really important question. The next one I have, if I could just be enabled to see the other questions, please, because I can only see the top of the Q&A line.
Melissa, I can read the questions to you if that's helpful.
Okay, so could you read me the next one then from Tommaso and tell me how many likes there are?
So I think you have them in slightly a different order. So I've just reordered them to likes, and the most liked is by Maru Mormina, who asks, how much is equity really at the heart of ODA research when impact is assessed against the still northern-dominated agendas? I can read the next one.
Okay, yep.
So the next one is from Preeti Parikh, who says, current GCRF funds are restricted to a few big calls with specific regional and topic remit, but would it not be more productive to create the ability to apply for GCRF funds on a rolling basis to foster diverse partnerships for impact?
Okay, and perhaps we could have one more.
Sure. So then the final one would be from Cordelia Lonsdale, who says, how can impact assessment of research be more informed by measures of impact that are more relevant to non-academic actors such as communities or practitioners?
Okay. All right, well, that's a really great selection of quite challenging questions. So let's go in turn. So pick up perhaps one or two of those and then just offer us a final remark, which might be kind of something you'd really like the audience to take home from this event. So maybe Helen, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. So I'll address the so how much equity can we build into partnerships when we are measuring impact against academic measures? I think it's a really great question. I think it's a fair question. Also, I would say that we are changing, and universities are changing and recognising. And so now within the REF, for example, we have impact case studies where we really are looking much more and valuing much more, development impacts of research rather than just top-tier journal publication. So that is something that there is movement in that direction. I think and also what's really interesting is we had a comment recently from a university pro-vice chancellor of research who said that the development research, the GCRF development research within his institute and the demands for the equitable partnership had actually had a knock-on effect and was improving the quality of research that was not development funded. And that actually their university had recognised that having those equitable partnerships and very high quality partnerships and focus on impact was improving research and was actually improving the excellence of their non-ODA research. So development research is actually feeding outwards, it's not just inwards. The rolling basis for funding in GCRF, so the Medical Research Council have actually started a rolling funding board for applied global health research, recognising that people do need time to build up those partnerships and they can't be restricted by our timetable of calls. We're watching that very closely. I'm very interested to see how that works, and we could perhaps looking at using that model more broadly within UKRI if it works for MRC. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, excellent. So Nyavani, would you like to go next? Pick up on a question and give us your last word.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I will address the issue of how can impact assessment of research be more informed by real measures of impact and things that are more relevant to non-academic actors. And just to agree, at AFIDEP, we have a tool called a So What tool, just a series of questions. So when you actually do engagement with the policymaker, you have to ask yourself, so what? And if you keep asking yourself the so what question, you come up to the end where actually this doesn't really matter, because it's not really helping anybody. It hasn't changed anything. So I would encourage us to be thinking in those ways. My understanding of impact assessment, for example, in REF in the UK, when it started, and I was Associate Dean and in charge of REF impact case studies then, we were just starting. So it's understandable that, some of the measures were sort of like mirrors of what we would like to see go forward. But as I think the impact agenda matures, we really need to be looking at that population level, at the SDG level. What difference has this made to people's lives? And I think when we get there, we've really reached impact. And just to say, this was a wonderful session, and I look forward to many more, if we can arrange many more like this. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. So Nupur, over to you to pick up on any questions and give us a final remark.
Thank you, Melissa. So just picking up on a question, I think, from Chris on the merger. It is very early days, Chris, but just to say that in terms of a focus on LICs and LMICs, the FCDO will continue to focus on eradicating extreme poverty and leaving no one behind. So international partnerships, including with low and middle income countries, will remain at the heart of our international development research effort, and we're hoping that that's not going to change. In terms of a final comment, I think as the discussion is on accelerating impact, I just wanted to flag that in terms of allocating research investments, in addition to tackling sort of fast emerging issues, I think as international development funders, we should also set aside resources for future unknowns, which are the issues that could take us by surprise in years to come, and think about how we can partner with other multilateral initiatives, the private sector, and other international development research funders to really amplify the impact of our development research work. Thanks.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Eunice.
Thank you. I'm going to touch briefly on this question about whether equity is really at the heart of ODA research when impact is assessed against the still northern dominated agendas. So I would say, I think definitely that, as we said, we need to reevaluate how we define research excellence. I would say that within FCDO, we look at impact as demonstrated by the case studies that have been launched, and that Marta spoke about today. It's about how are we informing policy? How are we changing the way we do things in practice? How is the research actually being used, and how can we see impact in regards to objectives and goals, and whether the global goals and other metrics. But we do understand that within the academic community, there is a lot of emphasis on other metrics, including publishing in high metric, in high impact journals and things like that. And I think that's something that we all need to be part of trying to influence, to ensure that impact is not just measured based on these metrics, and that we're looking at a broader set of indicators of impact of the research that we fund. And in terms of sort of a last remark is to say that I think, we as funders, we recognize that there is sort of more that needs to be done in terms of promoting equitable partnerships. I think, we are doing a lot, but we're not there yet. There's still a lot that needs to be done. And in regards to that, there's various, like a funders group that I'm involved in that's coordinated by UKCDR and many other groups, where we're looking at how we can go beyond just having principles to actually embedding them into practices, looking at how we can change our systems and processes, which we recognize they do sometimes perpetuate some inequalities. So how can we address those and ensure that people have equal opportunities, as Helen has spoken about as well today, in terms of accessing funding, in terms of being leading in agenda setting. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, what a rich discussion, and I can't possibly summarize it, but just in wrapping up, I mean, I think what's come through really clearly is the vital importance of research for development and impact, more important than ever, not just to address the threats and the challenges that we know about now in their integrated fashion leading up to the global goals, but also to address the things that we don't yet know about. And I think that was a really key point. Uncertainties, threats coming down the line, and the world needs to be well positioned. I think we've heard a lot about the importance of an agenda that's interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, co-produced, and genuinely delivers impact. And there are sort of three ingredients that I've heard coming through these remarks. One is that there's a whole set of tools, methods, incentives, mechanisms, examples of best practice in these that can be, I think, learnt from and taken forward. But secondly, if we're really to deliver, there's some redefining that needs to happen as well. We need to get out of the comfort zone of thinking we know what excellence means, even we know what capacity or equity mean, and actually to keep alive and to keep problematizing these kind of big concepts that define our research world is going to be very important. And then I think the third thing that's come shining through from all of you actually is the importance of relationships, equitable relationships, trusting relationships, and actually power relationships, which, like it or not, do affect the ways we work together across institutions, across places. And I think we need to keep alive some critical reflection on the problems that they pose and how to overcome those. So tools, redefinitions, relationships, I think are all going to be critical in what is a challenging but also incredibly exciting landscape ahead, and one in which I think there's opportunities for us all to contribute. So I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to pick up on all the questions, which I think were coming through thick and fast. We haven't really done justice to them today in a short time. But please let's continue the conversation. We'd encourage you to continue this debate online through Twitter, using that hashtag research4impact, as well as formal channels. So the integrated review is still ongoing. The formal consultation phase is over, but I think there are going to be continued opportunities to contribute to those discussions as we lead up to kind of settling out these questions about the UK's own positioning. And I think we need to keep this as a very international discussion. Our focus today has been on what the UK can do, but we've also heard very strongly that UK cannot do it alone, and we're in a global world of research exchanges. So I'm going to hand back to Marta now to give some final closing remarks, but please let me just thank the panelists enormously. You've all been fantastic. And I've really enjoyed the chance to hear from you. So Marta, back to you.
What a fantastic dialogue. Thank you again to Patrick for his introductory remarks. Thank you, Melissa, for chairing the panel, and to all our panelists for your really insightful perspectives on this topic. And thank you to our audience for joining us, for asking questions. Please do go check our impact success stories on the UKCDR website. A reminder that the webinar will be recorded and we will share this after the meeting. We will also be sharing a survey after the event to get feedback on the event and guidance. We would be really grateful if you could complete the survey, which we'll post in the Q&A box now, and also email to all of our attendees after the meeting. Many thanks again to all of you for joining the discussion today. Goodbye.